Now, this is a strange title, and it is an experimental title. I began this presentation by giving it the title "Not Sun," but I was playing with the word. Not really. Not could could have been written also N-O-T, meaning no sun, because it's night, because it's the longest night. Then I received some news from Arch Daily about, you will see some kind of so-called queer aesthetics, which surprised me, and you'll see why, because in the not sun aesthetics, there is no color. When you don't have sunlight, well, you could have color at night because of artificial means, electricity. But if you didn't have the artificial means, you would have no color, essentially. Color is connected with light. And anyway, so sorry, this is a tentative and partial title. You'll understand why I was playing with these words. But first, I want to say something about the megalithic structures of Europe, because the solstice was immensely important to the ancients. Not to us. We ignore them. We ignore the solstice, but they didn't, because for the so-called primitive man, these were celestial events of the highest importance. The agricultural societies of the past, or even prior to the agricultural societies of the past, the apparent, they didn't know it was apparent. We apparently know that it is apparent. The movement of the sun on the sky was of the highest importance. And you will see some examples of megalithic structures in Europe, but not only in Europe, where the consideration of the movement of the sun on the sky was of the highest importance. So dating back thousands of years, Europe's massive stone monuments aligned ancient peoples with the heavens above. This is very important. We don't do this any longer. We don't care about the heavens above. We don't align our buildings with certain trajectories at certain times of the great sun, the very source of life. We don't care, actually. We don't care about the sun. We don't care about the solstice. We don't care about the dialogue between the earth and what we call the heavens above or below. We lost that intimate, organic, extremely important, visceral connection between the humans and what we used to call the gods, or the metaphysics of the space beyond. We don't have that any longer. The Great Passage tomb of this in Britain, France, was built between 3,500 and 3,200 before Christ. Some 50 slabs, many richly decorated with engraved axes, zigzags, and whorls, lined with a 45-foot-long corridor leading to a funeral chamber. Now, look at these stones. Not only that, the mystery of placing them considering their huge weight, but look at their decoration. What made the so-called primitive man decorate these stones in this way? And this happened more than 5,000 years ago. You will see that they coordinated sometimes the entering of the light at the solstice, and not only at the solstice. First, there are two solstices, the summer solstice in June and the winter solstice now in December. And as I said, they are in reverse in the southern hemisphere. It moves me beyond measure the fact that the so-called primitive man coordinated his gestures, the architectural gestures, the constructive gestures, with external events that he considered of the highest importance. Experts now believe that megaliths stood at the very heart of ritual practice for the networks of communities scattered across Western Europe later in the New Stone Age or Neolithic period that had begun around 10,000 before Christ. Their function was both earthly and celestial. I like this very much. You see, the function was both earthly and celestial. And I ask myself, and I ask you, how many of our constructs or buildings or architectures are concerned simultaneously with the earthly and the celestial? We only consider the earthly, but we don't give a damn about what is called the celestial. A focus for rites concerning the movement of the heavenly bodies across the skies, a memorial to the community's ancestors, and then a inspiring site to cement local loyalty and solidarity. Now, some ancient solstice sites. I will show some examples, and there are others of buildings that seem to be connected with a solstice in a significant way. In the ancient world, people built a number of monuments to commemorate the solstice. One example is Newgrange, a huge Stone Age tomb mound built in the Irish countryside around 3200 before Christ, about 1,000 years before Stonehenge. It was also built before the Egyptian pyramids. A tunnel facing the solstice sunrise runs to a main chamber where the dead may have once been placed. A small window bathes the chamber in solstice light for 17 minutes. So you'll see now this Newgrange Island, monument, if I am to call it so, although the word is not quite appropriate, I think. Anyway, let me read a little about it. Older than both Stonehenge and the Egyptian pyramids, this mound-like monument may not look like much at first. However, once a year during the winter solstice, that is today, its magic is revealed as the sun rises. Sunlight floods the inner chamber of the monument after passing through a 19-meter-long passage. This ancient site demonstrates how an interest in the sun and light has been part of cultures for thousands of years. Something to bear in mind: if you want to witness this phenomenon, you have to be quick. The light disappears again after just 17 minutes. So at the winter solstice, for 17 minutes or so, the sunlight enters deep into the structure, and reaches the end where there is a certain chamber where it is imagined that the dead was placed. So, it's hard to believe that this was just by, pardon? I've heard the voice. If you want to say something, please do so. Otherwise, please turn off the microphone. So it is very, I think, very moving, and I don't think it is an accident that exactly at the winter solstice this happens. Although there are commentators who claim that there is that it's actually in a way an accident. Well, other people do not think so. This is the mound. It doesn't look very impressive, but it is more than 5,000 years old. And as I said, the light of the sunlight enters on the winter solstice. I don't know at what time exactly, through the corridor and reaches the ultimate end, which is the chamber of the dead. Now, the winter solstice at Stonehenge, the problem, there is some confusion. I am myself a little bit confused. Some of these monuments are connected with the equinox, others with the solstice, and it's not very clear to me. And sometimes you find information that they are connected with the equinox, and other times that they are connected with the solstice. But one thing is for sure, these primal monuments were coordinated in some way or another with the movement of the sun on the sky. And that it happened at the equinox or it happened at the solstice, maybe is not even so relevant. What is relevant is that there is a congruence, there is a conjunction between a certain human intention and the movement of the sun. It is this high respect and affection and even fear, this aware of the human beings vis-a-vis the sun, something we forgot. We really forgot because we are only concerned with pragmatic matters, with a certain functionalism, but we don't have a mystical relationship with the sun any longer. But here you see people, contemporary people just like us, gathering at Stonehenge to catch that magical moment when the light of the sun enters through a specific opening into the monument. And I do think to take into consideration again the relationship with the sun, and not just in functional terms, but also in emotional terms, mystical terms, would enrich our lives, I think. Because you feel less alone. You feel connected with the cosmos. We are all temporarily here on Earth. We all live for a number of years and then we die. We are born in order to die. But if you are connected with the sun, with the moon, with the plants, with the stones, with the trees, with the animals, if you are part of a cosmos, I think the chance for that the fear will overwhelm you decreases. Buckminster Fuller said something I think significant. He said, the difference between the environment and cosmos is this one. In environment or environmentalism, the environment is everything that is outside of the human being without the human being. We call it the environment. But in cosmos is something that comprises, that contains both the environment, what we call the environment, and us. So it's about integration. Environmentalism still keeps the division between us and the world, while cosmos is something that unites us with everything that is outside of us. So now in Peru, in the 1800 to 100 before Christ, these people, the Paracas people, crisscross the desert with lines of earth and rock called geoglyphs that connect ceremonial mounds with the place where the winter solstice sun sets on the horizon. The famed Nazca lines, inspiring monkeys, lizards, and other giant figures etched into the earth by a subsequent Peruvian culture around after there was 1 to 700, it's not known exactly, also feature alignments with the winter solstice. And now you'll see a few images of the Nazca lines in Peru. It is amazing. I mean, these things, which are giant, I mean, they together they have, I don't know how many kilometers. These are giant land arts, and they were done by so-called primitive people. I mean, come on. By comparison, we are probably more primitive than they were. This shows sophistication and a great ability to implement at a very large scale. I mean, this bird, I mean, look at the geometry, and it is a figuration, but it's huge. This is seen from the sky, from our present day planes. Why did they do this? It was the same attempt to connect with the above, with the cosmos, with the sky, with the sun. And apparently there are some coordinations between these giant geoglyphs, as they are called, and the winter solstice. I only show schematically. This is more like to incite you and myself towards further reading and to entice a preoccupation for something else. This is also at a huge scale in Peru. And why can I say this kind of preoccupation we do not have? We do other things. Of course, we go to the moon. We have lots of parking lots, and we have refrigerators, TVs, and so on. But this kind of cosmic art we don't do. Ancient Egypt's sprawling temple of Karnak was constructed in alignment with the winter solstice at Luxor more than 4,000 years ago. And you see some images of the temple of Karnak in Egypt, where again you have this alignment with, you know, the position of the sun on the sky at the winter solstice. In some cases at the equinoxes or the summer solstice, but in all cases, not in all cases, in significant cases, some very important buildings are aligned with these four extremely important moments in the journey of the sun on the sky: the spring equinox, the summer solstice, the autumn or the fall equinox, and now the winter solstice. And there are still people who believe in this, and you can see them there, here, you know, and it seems even your son, Louis Kahn at the Salk Institute coordinated the space between the two rows of buildings at the Salk Institute with the setting of the sun at the fall equinox. But in general, modern architecture ignores completely such preoccupations, which I think is a loss. Anyway, now Angkor Wat in Cambodia also has connections with summer solstice, and it depends, because the summer solstice in the southern hemisphere is the winter solstice in the northern, and so on. So it doesn't really matter if it is the summer solstice or the winter solstice. What is important, again, is that very important structures were and are connected with the movement of the sun on the sky. And this connection, I believe, is fundamental to attempt to create some harmony between man and cosmos, between man and nature. Now, Machu Picchu in Peru also has, it was not very clear to me, I couldn't find images that illustrated this, but apparently at Machu Picchu also there were preoccupations to align certain parts of the structures with the winter solstice. Now, initially I wanted to talk about architecture and darkness, because it is the longest night. And I look through the window, and yes, it is night, although it is just 30 minutes past 6 p.m. It is night. Now is the longest night of the year in the Northern Hemisphere. So I collected here a number of pictures about architecture and darkness. So on June 24th, when this was written, in time with the Southern Hemisphere's winter solstice, so again, in June, when in the Northern Hemisphere it is the summer solstice, in the Southern Hemisphere is the winter solstice. The Inca Empire celebrated Inti Raymi, a festival that honored the Inca religion's powerful sun god Inti and marked the Inca New Year. The festival is still celebrated throughout the Andes, and since 1944, a reconstruction has been staged in Cusco in Peru, less than 2 miles from its Inca Empire home. Ancient Romans celebrated the winter solstice with Saturnalia, a 7-day festival that involved giving presents, decorating houses with plants, and lighting candles. And Iranians celebrate Yalda in December. The festival, a mainstay since Zoroastrianism was Iran's dominant religion, traditionally honors the birth of Mithra, the ancient Persian god of light. And you'll see now some pictures of the present, you know, that show the approximations of an architecture that doesn't have too much light, that doesn't have too much natural light, and that doesn't even have too much artificial light. It just, I'm trying to, with some pictures, to evoke what the night might mean for architecture, meaning the absence of the sunlight. And here you see a selection of the best dark interiors that I took from Arch Daily, Architecture in Black. I think blackness or darkness could could be, under certain circumstances, a new beginning for apprehending in a new way the relationship with the sun. As a poet said, darkening darkness, thus the gates of light. So, and also in alchemy, nigredo, meaning darkening, was the first phase in the alchemical process. So maybe just as it happens right now that we have the longest night, but from tomorrow the day is beginning to increase, light is beginning to increase. So we go through darkness, through the maximum darkness, but the attempt is actually to arrive at light. And so there is the dialectic between darkness and light, between the night and the day. Here I have some of pictures in black and white about, you know, as I called it, darkness in architecture. This is a famous staircase by Louis Kahn at Yale, an early work by Louis Kahn. He was very preoccupied with light and shadow. And I just learned that Louis Kahn actually, because when he was born in a very poor family. He liked to draw, but he didn't have colors. He didn't have pencils. He drew with burnt matches. And apparently he continued in later years, even after he became a famous architect, to use sometimes burnt matches to draw. And it's interesting because, I don't know, it's something about drawing with burnt matches that, that moves me. Anyway, so this is a staircase by Louis Kahn. Some other pictures of you see in a completely dark interior, light enters very significantly. It doesn't matter the dimension of the window. What matters is the intensity of the penetration of the light of the thick or not so thick wall. And anyway, I think reflecting on darkness and on shadow, on the dialectics between light and shadow is important. Because again, just as we have the interplay between light and shadow at the level of the cosmology of the day, or of the 24 hours, we have the interplay between day and night. Here we have Tadao Ando with his famous Chapel of Light. And if I remember correctly, I read that initially he didn't want to have glass here in the cross, just to be open to the elements. It's a rather severe cross of light, but otherwise, the building, with the exception of this window here, is dark. The Venice Biennial, I don't know what this is. Yeah, but when you have this interplay between night and day, between darkness and light becomes very qualitatively very potent, very important. And, you know, I think this also goes in the field of, I mean, into today's world, or until our recent crisis, we loved a lot of transparency or glass walls and so on. But I think a small window could be much more a recipient of light in qualitative terms than a huge glass wall. Darkness. Well, in part darkness, although you have darkness, but the light asserts itself even more significantly when it is in its dialectics with darkness. But when you have the longest night, and if you don't have artificial means to create light, the chances that the architectural environment is in good measure colorless, without color. This is the Agua Tower in Chicago by Jeannie Gang, Studio Gang. seen by a photographer who loved black and white photography. Concrete. This is Miralles and Taliabue, the cemetery near Barcelona. Anyway, these are just some pictures in black and white about a world where the night temporarily won the fight with the day. Now we see something strange here. I mean, strange. This is a photographer who photographed. He said, I don't do photography that captures reality, but I do photography that creates reality. He photographs existing buildings, but he recreates the reality through his artistic means. He's a contemporary photographer, and I wanted to show these images of a black and white architectural reality where there is no color and where there isn't really too much sunlight. If there is light at all, is the one generated by the moon or by the spirit and artistry of the photographer. He's a young photographer from, I think, South Carolina, from the United States. But the truth is, the same building during the day and during the night shows a different face, so to speak. It is different. And when we do our projects, we very rarely think of the building at night. So again, I repeat what I said a few times. Right now in the Northern Hemisphere is the longest night of the year. Now the lighting he used here is artificially created. It's not. It doesn't really come from the moon. I don't know how he manufactured these photographs, but they are all animated by a light which is not the light of the sun. It's almost a mystical kind of lighting. Black architecture. What would black architecture be? Well, architecture that uses blackness. You know, blackness here is obvious. Black buildings, but what you see here, the trees are not black, the trees are green, but the buildings are black. Black buildings in the longest night of the year, the winter solstice for the Northern Hemisphere in 2020. Black buildings. Black buildings are interesting, you know, because they assert their otherness. And in a way, they are metaphors for what architecture in a way is. In contrast with them, the green of nature is even more potent. Now, this is a residence, an exhibition residence designed by this car manufacturer from England, luxury cars manufacturer, Aston Martin. It's you know, a house that shows the interest in architecture of Aston Martin. The roofing is black, but the walls are glass. This is also part of the preoccupations with the cinematic architecture and black architecture. And you see the black car, the futuristic car that asserts the triumph of man over nature and over everything. Here, we don't have any kind of reference to the movement of the sun on the sky. That belonged to the so-called primitive civilizations. But I think by comparisons, we are arrogantly less than the so-called primitives. Now, David Chipperfield, the Hotel Puerta in America. America is a hotel in Spain where in a building, a hotel, several architects contributed, and he did this this interior design on the third floor of that hotel. Um, Everything here is artificial. The lighting is artificial. The blackness, or partial blackness, the grayness, is is an architecture that is a little bit immodest, if I can call it so, because in its otherness, it proclaims some kind of an exceptionalism that the human beings have. And I think that exceptionalism is not only debatable, but also dangerous. On the other hand, I mean, look at, it's a very refined interior, look at the handle of the door and how the light enters in a refined way. But all in essence is some kind of refinement that is, sorry to use a moralistic word, rather decadent, in my opinion. Anyway, other pictures of darkness and grayness and the absence of the sunlight. But now we arrive at this diagram that shows that the great Pantheon in Rome was not at all indifferent to the movement of the sun on the sky, the apparent movement of the sun. You see, the winter solstice, when the sun is at the lowest, it reaches here the dome of the great Pantheon. And when is the spring equinox, April 21st, you have the spring equinox is here, is the only time of the year when the sunlight exits the building through the entrance and the exit of the building. And it's incredible. I mean, the sunlight, if there is sun on that day, is welcoming you when the spring arrives, the spring equinox, into the building. So this was not just an accident. Obviously, the Emperor Adrian, who was involved in the making of this building, and his architects knew what they were doing. Now we arrive at something, and this might have nothing to do with a winter solstice and with everything I said before, but somehow I felt tempted to incorporate this so-called boudoir Babylon into this presentation, just to show you the contrast between, on one hand, the ancient civilizations, on the other hand, on one hand, the ancient civilization plus an architecture of grayness and darkness and blackness, and this preoccupation with color, but in a puzzling way, which seems to signify a return to some kind of postmodern, I don't know how to call it, joie de vivre, we'll see. So this young designer, Adam Nathaniel Furman, transforms this cafeteria into a super camp boudoir Babylon. Now, what about these two words, boudoir Babylon? Babylon is extremely important in the history of humankind and in the history of religion. But now we talk about a boudoir Babylon. What could that be? We'll see. Queer oglyphs and gender color palette feature in an installation designed by Adam Nathaniel Furman and Australian practice sibling architecture as part of the National Gallery of Victoria's NGV Triennial. Called Boudoir Babylon, the project celebrates queer aesthetics through a series of painted plywood volumes in this gallery, which create different spaces for gathering and socializing. Although the design incorporates stereotypically gendered colors such as baby blue and pink, now again, in contrast with the blackness and grayness of an architecture where the sunlight is absent, I show things now where the baby blue and pink are recontextualized and subverted to challenge traditional notions of what is male or female. That's why I thought, you know, mostly like an amusement to talk about the queer solstice, if there is such a thing. This is known in the LGBTQ plus community as a gender fuck. Anyway, look where we arrived at. To me, this is not shocking, but well, it is also shocking. So we saw images of minimalist black and white architecture devoid of any color, and now we see this bonanza of color that is so, you know, it's artificial as well. But color is kind of decaf color. It looks like it, it smells like it, but it isn't it. And I think it isn't it exactly because there is a divorce from, on one hand, the two fundamental principles in life that could be united, it's true, but to unite the masculine principle with the feminine principle is not an easy matter. And here I think the matter is trivialized. And this is, I think, very telling that today, I am talking about today, I mean, not the day of the solstice, but our time when there is this preoccupation with some kind of a sensuality or sensuousness that is very decorative and somehow, I don't know, I feel there is a certain emptiness here. Plus the architectural language is so, I don't know, in a way it doesn't seem to be authentic. It's stage design. To me, this is alarming. The fact that in London or in Australia, such things are promoted and I imagine encouraged is bothering. Is bothering me. It reminds me also of, you know, Venturi, Scott Brown, of a certain kind of postmodernism that I find highly questionable. But this is what happens when you are divorced from the cosmic cycles of birth and rebirth, when you are divorced from the sun, when you are divorced from the winter solstice, the summer solstice, the spring and fall equinoxes, and so on. So the human being is now self-referential, but very impoverished, I think, by it. Now look at the democratic monument by the same designer. London designer Adam Nathaniel Furman's democratic monument, which is kind of oxymoronic. A democratic monument is a proposal for town halls around the UK that would feature bright tiles and a diverse mix of architectural styles. As civic buildings, democratic monuments would be brightly colored combinations of styles and materials, reflecting the unique combinations of communities that make up different cities around the country. Now look what he proposed. Sorry, Lisa, I want you to see the picture from afar. This is also a recent phenomenon. So please remember what I showed earlier. On one hand, the ancient civilizations, then black and white architectures devoid of blue sky and the sunlight. And now we arrive at here, the blue sky and sunlight, but look at the architecture. Is it really what we need? I mean, it is, in my opinion, a mimicked joie de vivre. We laugh in order not to cry. It's stage design. It's not real. It's like, you know, that festival in Arizona, the firemen, or how is it called? I forgot, but I think you know what I'm talking about. Is this preoccupation with a certain extravaganza that is not based on the factuality of reality, is based on some kind of a bonanza mentality, which to me is very problematic. And I really hope that the pandemic and the climate change and the pollution and the rising level of the seas will wake us up, because we consume the resources of the earth for what? For this is not an innocent dream, in my opinion. It is a guilty dream. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I should not be like Savonarola and claim that I know what is true and what is false. But it bothers me what I see here because it's I think it's a mimicked joy. This is not real joy. Uh, Real joy is something that is not concerned with just the fascia, just with the appearance, just with the facade, but with something that is behind the facade. This is Potemkin architecture. This is not the color I would like to have in the world. This is an artificial environment that is created almost by I would say by a despairing human being. This is how I am tempted to I feel tempted to interpret what I see here. And these are very recent phenomena. Now, architecture and winter. This is the larger title I would have liked to use. You will see some winter stations that bring warmth to Toronto's frozen beaches. They had this call for entries and they built some of them. I just show some images of these winter stations. The 5 finalists have emerged from the 196 submissions of Toronto's first international winter stations design competition. Why winter stations today? Why are we talking about them? Because officially, so-called officially, winter starts today with the winter solstice. Drawing proposal from 36 countries around the world, the competition challenge entrants to transform the lifeguard stations on Toronto's east beaches into public art pieces for the winter. The finalist designs were constructed in mid-February and will be displayed until March anyway. This was from 5 years ago. Yeah, they are colorful, they are playful, but they are not real. I mean, they are still temporary structures that just happen in a way to be built, during the winter. But I prefer something like this to what we saw before, because here there is playfulness, there is color, but I think here the playfulness is more innocent. In my opinion, it's not charged with all kinds of abstruse, sexual connotations or whatever. But it's still this, I wouldn't really call architecture or winter architecture, because it is, this could have been built exactly the same way during the summer. The question is how to build being aware of the winter specifically for the winter. I'll show some buildings in that sense as well. What I show now, these are not answers. These are rather questions. I am trying to instigate a concern with the winter, which begins today in the Northern Hemisphere, and to provoke myself also thinking about what it means, the winter, what it means, the longest night, what it means, the apparent movement of the sun on the sky, and so on. But things are complicated now because winter seems to recede. We don't have winters like we used to. Christmas will be in a few days, and it still doesn't snow where I am. There is no snow. And so something happened, no doubt. The climate is changed. So the winter is vanishing somehow. And, here I am talking about architecture and winter, but what do you do when the winter is not here any longer? Some kind of a mecca on the beach. Now, I want to show you the presentation about night architecture. Okay. Night architecture, because now is the longest night of the year. So architecture of the night. This is a presentation I did just very, very, very recently, like 1 hour ago or so. I began to I was looking for nocturnal architecture because I was still unhappy with the materials I had. And I came across this architecture of the night, and you'll see some things that will stir us up to think further about this subject. Architecture of the night in the longest night of the year, winter solstice 2020. Architecture of the night or nocturnal architecture, also referred to as illuminated architecture, and particularly in German, light architecture, is architecture designed to maximize the effect of night lighting, which may include lights from within the building, lights on the facade or outlining elements of it, illuminated advertising and flood lighting. With the rise of artificial lighting in the 19th and 20th centuries, architects were increasingly aware of it as an element to be integrated into design. Deliberate use of it has been popular at various times, including the design of skyscrapers and other commercial buildings in the 1920s and 1930s, in the 1950s and 1960s, and in modern festive city architecture. The term is attributed to Raymond Hood, a North American architect, writing in a special issue of the Bulletin of the General Electric Company, also titled Architecture of the Night, in February 1930. He writes, "The possibilities of night illumination have been barely touched. Eventually, the night lighting of buildings is going to be studied exactly like Gordon Craig and Norman Bell Jeeves have studied stage lighting." Gordon Craig was a famous theater director. Every possible means to obtain an effect will be tried: color, varying sources, and direction of light, pattern, and movement. The illumination of today is only the start of an art that may develop as our modern music developed from the simple beating of a tom-tom. This is a building from The Hague in the Netherlands from 1928 that was photographed in 1930. Here it is night. The picture is in black and white, but the building is well lit. Then spire of the Chrysler building, which was built in 1930s, but illuminated in 2005. The architect of the Chrysler building in Manhattan was William Van Allen. And you see here, again, at night, the building becomes very potent because of the artificial light that exposes certain parts of its being. Now, this is a movie theater from 1928 in Germany, photographed in 2011. So here you only see some examples of buildings that where there was an explicit concern with the lighting during the night, not necessarily during the longest night of the year as we have today. This is a building by Hitler's architect Albert Speer from the New Reich Chancellery from 1939, and it was photographed in April 1939. This reminds one of the picture we saw of that young photographer from South Carolina. You know, you wonder, where does this light come from? The sky is black, it's dark, there is no light. So where does the light come from? Indianapolis Power and Light Headquarters building, a 1968 remodeling by these architects, and they used lighting designers. A photograph from 2009. Of course, there are plenty of examples because thanks to electricity, we can do wonders at night. We can do wonders at night, but we don't see any longer the stars on the sky. Another building from 2000s, here it is, during the night. The colors are exploding, but artificially exploding. Now, this is an interesting construction. It's rather a sculpture, it's not a building, in the Netherlands from 2004 that attempted to indicate that love is the dominant mood of citizens. Well, I would take it mostly as a wishful thinking. But this would be an interesting transition to the next presentation, which is about architecture and fire, but also architecture and love, and also architecture and the sun, because the sun is connected with fire, and fire is connected with redness, and love is red, and passion is red, and so on. But as a transition, we see a few pictures of the D Tower in the Netherlands that apparently wanted to indicate that love is the dominant mood of citizens. I hope this is more than a wishful thinking, but it's an interesting sculpture or structure, and it is colored in various colors, depending on it's green, it's red, it's blue. It is a triumph of the color in a way in the darkness of the night, or the end of the day or the beginning of the day. Okay, and now I go to the third presentation, which is the most ample, and it is a complex attempt I made to address the relationship between architecture and the sun, or architecture and fire. And here I wrote in Romanian, Arhitectura și focul, architecture and fire. I wrote 01 because it's an attempt that should be continued at one point. This presentation I prepared 2 or 3 years ago, and I launched a call for entries. I invited people to send their proposals for this theme, and I received one from Vienna, from an architect who graduated from the University of Architecture in Bucharest. And at that time, she was studying with Zaha Hadid. She was still alive, Zaha. And she sent 2 paintings. Ioana Binica sent 2 paintings. This is one. And you see, they were both concerned with fire, with the sun, and with love. And in a way, we have this triad, the sun. And it's normal to talk about the sun when we talk about the winter solstice, although it is the longest night. And then if we talk about the sun, we also talk about passion, we talk about love, and we talk about fire, the fire of passion, the redness of passion, the redness of great intensity. Here we have the whirling forces of love, and there is a cosmical intertwining of forces here that Ioana tried to suggest. Now, another student, well, a student this time from urbanism at the university here, he proposed a solar clock, in a large space in Bucharest. You can see it here. He was very knowledgeable about such matters, and he claimed that he used a software, and this solar clock would work. And it doesn't matter. The attempt was a good one to connect with the sun, not as the ancient civilizations did it in their way, and maybe at times they approximated something like this. But I think this is an attempt to connect vertically with the sun, and thus feel less alone in the universe. So he imagined an urban, large-scale clock. Now, here the polemical side in me said, wait a minute then, but in what way are we concerned with burning today? You know, burning through hotness, through passion, through love, through the light of the sun, or through this. Because I see all the time announcements of this kind. New fat burner takes GNC by storm. First of all, what is a storm? Our preoccupation with the fat on the belly is pathological. It really is. You know, we don't care any longer about the burning fire of passion. We don't care any longer about the burning force power of the sun. We care about burning the fat on our bellies. So this is the burner that preoccupies us, the new fat burner. And I don't know. I am sarcastic towards my own age. Now, Gottfried Zemper. I jump from one. This is a vast subject. You know, you see, I talked about the longest night, about gray architecture, night architecture, ancient civilizations, even queer solstice, as I call it. Now, what does Gottfried Zemper have to do with all of this? Well, Gottfried Zemper was extremely important because he thought that the first house ever built was the primeval house was like this. The hunters and the fishermen returned from work and they gathered around the fire. They had no home, no house was ever built. So they understood fire was extremely important for their survival. So they thought of creating some kind of device, something to protect fire. So they only had bushes and vegetable materials, plants around them, and they created through weaving vertical partitions to protect the fire. This was the man, the architect, a very important German architect of the 19th century. He thought of the four elements of architecture: the hearth, that is where the fire was; the roof that protected the fire; the enclosure, which was woven from vegetable material; and the mound, elevating the fire from the earth a little bit to protect it from floods and animals and so on. I will not read this now. I already mentioned the four elements, and they were illustrated in his book. This is the hearth, and then the enclosure through weaving vegetable material, then the mound is a little bit elevated from the earth, and then the roof that is carpentry. And you see the four elements of architecture. The origins of each element can be found in the traditional crafts of ancient society: hearth, fire and ceramics; roof, carpentry; enclosure, weaving; and mound, stone masonry. Now, fire. Fire is also the source of life for Frank Lloyd Wright, but fire also punished Frank Lloyd Wright and destroyed some of his buildings, including killing the woman he loved and her two sons. Here is Frank Lloyd Wright with a fiery scarf in the desert, elegant as ever, maybe 85 or so, towards 90 here. The great architect in the desert with a communistic, so to speak, scarf, but a burned building, burned by that very fire that he thought was central to his architecture, and almost all his building, if not all of his domestic architecture, is centered around the hearth, meaning around fire. Now you see the hearth in Romanian traditional architecture, and I think there is great potential in using this model, this way of conceiving, of honoring fire in a functional way, but also in a symbolic way. I think there is great potential in replacing the banality of the modern stove with some kind of a hearth that connects with what Gottfried Zemper said, because the origin of architecture is there in the fire. And Wright was right this time, and not wrong, was right by placing the stove, the chimney, the hearth at the very center of the house. These are images from folk architecture from Romania. You see that the place of the fire is literally the crux, the center of the house. It's not just about cooking, it's about many things. It's centering the family. It's almost a symbol of the unity between the two. And all kinds of activities took place in the proximity of the hearth. Anyway, there are connections between the hearth and altars. I don't know very well why I have this picture here, but here you see an example of houses with chimneys that are also referring to the fire within, then fire, and then a beautiful quotation from an important Romanian philosopher. I will read it to you. The beauty of flame. So again, why am I talking about fire? Well, I'm talking about fire because you cannot talk about the sun without talking about the fire. They are related. They are, they reflect each other. And why am I talking about the sun? Because the winter solstice is because of the sun, because of the movement of the sun in a certain way on this particular day. So Emile Cioran said, the beauty of flames lies in their strange play, beyond all proportion and harmony. The diaphanous flare symbolizes at once grace and tragedy, innocence and despair, sadness and voluptuousness. The burning transcendence has something of the lightness of great purifications. I wish the fiery transcendence would carry me up and throw me into a sea of flames, where, consumed by their delicate and insidious tongues, I would die an ecstatic death. The beauty of flames creates the illusion of a pure, sublime death, similar to the light of dawn. Immaterial, death in flames is like a burning of light, graceful wings. Do only butterflies die in flames? What about those devoured by the flames within themselves? A beautiful last question. What does it mean to die devoured by the flames within? It means to have passion. This is what it means. This is a project I did many years ago for Times Square, where I proposed the red tower for the fire and the white tower for the water, the red tower for the king and the white tower for the queen. Two towers face to face. It's because I don't really like to repeat myself, and I made this presentation before, and now I feel awkward to say again what I said then. But if you know a little bit the street realities of Manhattan, 42nd Street, very famous in New York, 48th Street, and then you have the crossroads of the world at the 45th Street. So it's like an hourglass in the site plan. So I proposed two towers, the red tower at south and the white tower at north, and the red tower symbolizing fire and the sun and the king and sulfur, and the white tower symbolizing the queen, water, the moon, and what else? Mercury, yes. And anyway, it's about the unity of the world. It's about the conjunction of two realities that complement each other, man and woman, fire and water, the sun and the moon, the day and the night, and so on. And this is an ideogram what used at Taliesin West by Frank Lloyd Wright. And strangely, I did a project at one mine that resembles a lot what he did here. I did a project for a company that wanted to use a certain material in a cubicle 20 feet by 20 feet by 15 feet, I think. And but this I don't know how to call it, logo or ideogram was used by Frank Lloyd Wright. And I see the same interest in the conjunction of two forces. You will see what I'm talking about. This is apparently what Frank Lloyd Wright did, was inspired by an inscription on a stone on his estate in Taliesin West in the desert. And this is the project I did. Maybe you don't see it very well, but this is very similar to what Frank Lloyd Wright had. Here I imagine the red force and the white force circling each other, you know, like the king and the queen, or the man and the woman, and then meeting in the center where the chemical wedding is to take place, and then the Carl Jung's hermaphrodite being coming into being. You see the sun and you see the moon. So in these projects, I was attempting to bring together two opposite forces, the day and the night, fire and water, the man and the woman, the king and the queen, and so on. Anyway, this is another project I did called Pyrotecture, also concerned with fire, for a firebone, I forgot where, in Iceland, I think, or yeah, I think in Iceland. Now, Heraclite, my God, there is so much to say, and I really hate to repeat certain things that I presented previously, but maybe you didn't hear me then, so I hope you didn't. Heraclitus, what is the relevance of Heraclitus here? Well, for Heraclite or Heraclitus, fire was the most important thing. Why would Heraclitus choose fire as the first principle of the universe? How would fire change into the other elements? How is fire always constant yet changing? So I'm not reading this, but for Heraclitus, fire was was even prior to God. You see, the cosmos was not made by gods, but always was and is eternal fire, Heraclitus. But the connection between fire and the sun is obvious. Le Corbusier didn't talk much about the fire, but as opposed to Frank Lloyd Wright, but he talked a lot about the sun. Most of his sketches are about showing the sun on the sky and its relationship with the building. Look, he knew very well that it's the earth moving around the sun. Then why does he show the trajectory of the sun on the sky with this arrow, as if the sun moves? Well, this is the appearance that the sun moves, although we know now that the earth moves around the sun. But one thing is important here and clear. Le Corbusier was a solar architect. He was very, very concerned with the movement of the sun on the sky. Here again, we see, references, I mean, not references. He was very concerned about how the sunlight enters or doesn't enter the building. And here he is concerned not only with the sun, but also with the moon. For the assembly, the parliament building in Chandigarh, he talks about the sun and the moon, and you see both on the sky. And he says, dans le palais de l'Assemblée, possibilité de fête cosmique, la lune et le soleil. So both the moon and the sun are taken into consideration, something often we forget to do. Here we see solstice d'hiver, that is the winter solstice today. And this is the summer solstice. At the summer solstice, the sun is at the highest, and at the winter solstice, it's at the lowest. So indeed, Le Corbusier was a solar architect. Here we see again the trajectory of the sun. The sun goes up in the morning and then goes down, and then the night follows. The dialectics between the light, the day, and the night are continuously present in his sketches and in his conception about life and architecture. You see, le soleil se lève, the sun is going up, then during the night it goes down, and then le soleil se lève à nouveau, the sun is rising again. La journée solaire de 24 heures, the solar journey of 24 hours, rhythm of the activity of human beings. This is why it is important to be connected with the solstices and the equinoxes, because they structure, they order the rhythms of our lives. And here we have this kind of strange ideogram that represents in a way his psychology. Half sun, half, kind of a Medusa, monstrous moon-like figure, Apollo, Dionysus, or another pair of opposite forces. Anyway, here we have l'unité d'habitation, again with a sketch, the winter solstice and the summer solstice. And here in section shown, the winter, in the winter, the sun is very low. In the summer, the sun is very high. Chambord in France, a magnificent honoring of both the sun and fire through the incredible chimneys. Look at them. At Chambord in France, we have this magnificent architecture that is celebrating fire, and in a way, it also is an homage, an architectural homage to the sun. For us, for the moderns, for the contemporary architects, chimney lost often the symbolic, metaphorical meaning, but it shouldn't. That's because we desacralize architecture. We don't think in symbolic and metaphorical terms most of the time. This is what we do today. But this is an architecture that is devoid, if we can call it architecture. It's actually just a structure, a building, but not really architecture. Here we have Rudolf Steiner, who was an architect, although he was a philosopher. Here he emphasizes, maybe to dimensions that are difficult to accept, the symbolism of the fire. Then we have the great Antoni Gaudi with his unbelievable chimneys on the top of his building in Barcelona. Again, these are celebrations of fire, of light, of the conjunction between the earth and the sky. Unfortunately, we also have the other side, the contemporary side. We exploit fire and we pollute the air, and we are not concerned with beauty. We are only concerned with efficiency. Then we have the fire station by Zaha Hadid. And then we have fire by a Coca-Cola building. Is the fire of spending your money on Coca-Cola. This is what it is. Red buildings, redness is associated with fire, obviously. Remember those black and white pictures and black architecture and nocturnal architecture. Now we have red architecture, redness, Parc La Villette, Bernard Tschumi, architecture concept. Red is not a color, with his provocative way. Bernard Tschumi is making us think twice about certain things. This is not by Tschumi. I don't know who did it. This is Ricardo Bofill near Barcelona. So the triumph of color after the longest night, meaning from tomorrow, the day is beginning to grow. Just think of this, that in cosmos, the gods of the cosmos are working towards bringing back the day and the light to increasing significance. Anyway, this is Legoretta, I think, not a glorious building, but red. This is a terrible building, I think, which mimics, it is red, but it has no life in it, I would say. Romeo and Juliet by Frank Lloyd Wright is not red, but is about the redness of love. Romeo and Juliet. Well, it's a water tower, funny in a way, because Romeo and Juliet stand about love and fire, but this is actually a water tower. And here is the building, an early structure by Frank Lloyd Wright. I just try to show various architectures that deal with the theme of fire, sun, sunlight, color, love, passion, and so on. Here we have fire temples in Iran, and there are great buildings, great structures, because their religion, based on the Mitraic Persian religion, was based on fire. So we have here temples dedicated to fire. We don't do this any longer. Of course, we have radiators, we have all kinds of things. We don't think about the miracle of fire. But we pay the price for our comfort. In other societies at different times, life was perhaps more difficult, but the symbolism of some of their buildings had a complexity that our smiths, all these are temples from Iran dedicated to fire. These are architects from Iran gathered at one of these temples. When I look at these pictures, I realize how important, how vital, how revered the sun and fire was. Actually, it is a fire religion, and Zoroastrianism is based on fire. Look, there is in the center. Often the fire is continuously burning. Fire. Now this is a, I don't know if I should show this. I made myself a proposal for the Memorial Gardens at the World Trade Center, a forest of columns with two mounds where the existing towers existed. Well, sorry, where the previous towers existed that fell. And there I imagined the intersection of the diagonals in plan of the footprint of the building to have well, not eternally, but constantly burning fire. Well, the perspective is not very well drawn, but you get the idea. With a black stone column erected for any person who died, about 3,000 people who died when the World Trade Center fell to the ground. Now we see a building that mimics fire in Azerbaijan because they have oil now, and of course they can mimic even fire. But is it really fire? You know, it's the shape seems to be of flames, but is it truly fire? Maybe at night because of the color to an extent. Anyway. This building is white, but built by Zaha Hadid. I don't know very well why I included it in the maybe because in the fluidity of the building there is something connecting it with well, flames are not really fluid, but there is a movement of the flames that could connect with this building, which is not one of my preferred buildings by Zaha, but for some reason I included it. This was an exhibition. I actually had an exhibition called Architecture in Winter in Evanston some years ago, but I couldn't find the works that I displayed then. I had another exhibition called Red, about fire, about the redness of the sun and fire, and you see some images quickly, all kinds of works sent by various people dealing with fire, dealing with redness, dealing with hotness and passion. And here I displayed the poem by the great pharaoh Ikhnaton, dedicated to the sun. And I suggest to you, if you want to read it, to search for it on the web, you can find it. The first large poem written in Egypt, considered a cultured, form of writing by this great pharaoh, Ikhnaton, dedicated, and here he is. This is Ikhnaton and his wife Nefertiti worshiping the sun, the very sun that made the winter solstice possible and the movement of the days and nights and so on. So Ikhnaton, the author of the monotheistic religion of Ra, the only God, the sun God. Anyway, I go quickly through this. All kinds of works related to the theme redness and fire and the sun. Hello, Ikhnaton and his wife Nefertiti worshipping the sun, as you can see. And we are not worshipping the sun any longer, but maybe we should. Um, there is so much to say, and I'm beginning to be a little bit tired. I think I chose the difficult road to show too many things, and maybe you are even a little bit confused about all these things. They are all approximations of the same theme: cosmos, the sun, fire, passion, diversity of interests, the attempt to bring them together, to unite them for a wholeness of life, which we do not have any longer. Anyway, lava, lava, which is the liquid fire, and which moves me very much. Lava, yes, liquid fire. Um, so it is a solar water in a way. I wanted to launch a competition, the House of Crimson, when Harvard celebrated I don't know how many years of its existence, and crimson is the color of this is crimson, the color of Harvard, which I find a very sensuous color. Maybe it's questionable now to have so much sensuousness in the academic field. I'm not going to read you this. Sculpture, this is something that I did, which is about conflict. It's about redness, it is about passion, but it's also about disruption and distraction. Because between love and war is an intimate relationship. That's why some gods and goddesses are both gods and goddesses of love and war. So here you have war, but you also have, you could say, some kind of eros. A burned building, this I also did. I was concerned with this theme for a long time. How would a burned building look like? Well, it would be ashes, of course. A red building before becomes ashes, before it becomes gray. Francis Bacon, this was studied by an Egyptian architect who is now in New York, Shakira Hamad, bringing redness, the redness of disruption into a structure that was, to be maybe less passionate, but the redness brought out something else. This is also a project by her, the House of Crime, because redness manifests itself also destructively in terms of crimes, and St. Louis is the crime capital of the United States, and this is the Great Arch by Eero Saarinen, and I proposed a call for entries to problematize it with to show the other side, the untold story by Saarinen. That is, Saarinen not only showed light and optimism and so on, but what about the fact that St. Louis is the crime capital of the United States? So Shakira Hamad proposed this hybrid architectural creature that is the monster that parasitically disrupts. This is not by her, but someone also thought of somehow bringing into some kind of dialectics the disruptive force of the torus, of the bull, in the context of an arch. Anyway, what I was trying to say here, what I'm trying to say is that redness and passion is just like the sunlight. In excess could be burning, could be damaging. And so you have something that is saying, life asserting, becoming the very opposite. It destroys. And so there is this tension, this dialectic between what is positive and what is negative. And you cannot have one without the other. You cannot have day without night. You cannot have night without day. They are all an interplay. There is an interplay in the wholeness of life. Frank Lloyd Wright, fireplaces. As I said, for Frank Lloyd Wright, the fireplace was always the seat, the central point in the house. Not necessarily the geometrical center, but the fireplace was always the germinative seed from which the house, the building sprang. So this is the falling water. The fireplace is always very, very, very important. Falling water again. This is Robbie house. You see in the plan, this is the fireplace right here. It grounds the building, just as Gottfried Zemper thought that the hearth should be the centering element of the house. I don't know if Frank Lloyd Wright read Zemper or not, but they meet in their intuition that fire was and is and will be the centering, stabilizing force of the house. Everywhere in his buildings, domestic architectures, the fireplace is at the center. Gaudi, of course, chimneys. Who builds chimneys like this these days? No one. He did. Why? For functional reasons, they were not needed like this. It was again because a good architect lives on two planes of existence. One is the terrestrial and one is the connection between the terrestrial and the celestial. And this is what we have here. Here he was helped by a brilliant architect, Jujol or Hukol. He didn't do this by himself, but he was the author of this building, and I'm sure everything was done with his approval, and more than his approval, probably at his instigation. They are glorious, and I have been there on the terrace of this building, and they are glorious. Just like at Chambord. They are symbols, but they are symbols done in a physical, with the physical matter, and they are really rings of conjunction between the earth and the sky. Now, the miserable side of fire, as you can see here, immense pollution, and it's a tragedy. It happened and still happens in some parts of the world. And the multitude of cars we have on the highways of the world is also producing a lot of pollution, a lot of burning that is very detrimental to life, to the climate, and so on. Now, altars, I already showed some altars which are also present in the Greek culture, in primeval societies. Altars are about fire. The altar in a church is a teast. That's where the sun rises. That's where you move towards inside the church. Like here, it is fire, but it's also in the proximity or pointing towards east where the sun rises. So again, we have the connection between fire and the sun and the trajectory of the sun. The sun comes up at east. The burning happens at the altar, which is also at the east within the church. Bernini with his great baldachin at San Pietro. Altars, which are at east, and that's where the light comes from, and that's where you move towards in this particular religion. And now in more so-called primitive pagan religions, we have fire per se at night, and this is actually still happening in some villages in Romania because there are still connections with telluric forces and with a pagan form of spirituality that we don't believe in any longer. But in some villages, these such festivities still happen at particular times. I think such a thing also happens in December. I'm not very knowledgeable about this, but I do believe there is a force and there is truth and there is even beauty in these manifestations of a primeval form of spirituality that we lost the connection with. The sun and then fire. The sun and fire. They are connected. And they are connected at Stonehenge, and they are connected at the distant horizon, and they are connected at these night festivities, and they are connected with Nefertiti and her worship of the great Ra. One thing is for sure, we cannot continue to live in the absence of some spiritual concerns, and in the absence of doing so, we impoverish our lives unacceptably. That's why I think it is very, very, very important, instead of watching another useless TV show or HBO movie on I don't know what channel, to reflect on the winter solstice and to reflect on the fact that with every advancing minute, we are advancing towards asserting the light of the day again. Tomorrow morning, the day is a little bit longer than it was yesterday. And so it's something beautiful that in cosmos, there is this interplay between light and darkness, between the day and the night. From today onwards, we are moving towards spring already, although winter just starts today, but it starts paradoxically with the day increasing every day, little by little. Thank you. I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted because, and I appreciate that you are still here, some of you.